Hello, everyone. Welcome to our class of AngularJS for learning the basics of AngularJS. This is a beginner level class. So if you're planning to learn AngularJS, then you are in the right place because in this class, we will cover everything to get you started with AngularJS. Let's take a look what you will learn from this class. Introduction to AngularJS, understanding command lines, controllers in AngularJS, scope and its relation with controller view part 1 and part 2, understanding scope inheritance, data binding, AngularJS ng show and ng hide, ng repeat, AngularJS filters, ng include, AngularJS form, and ng model, dependency, and ng root. After completing this class, you'll be able to set up AngularJS apps and manage them via command lines, handle data using controllers, scopes, and data binding, dynamically display content with ng show, ng hide, and ng repeat, format data using filters, and include templates with ng include, work with forms using ng model, and validate user input, inject dependencies and manage services, bootstrap AngularJS apps using the ng app. This is a project-based class, so during learning, you will have class project. So what you learned, you will be able to participate in class project and you can do practice while you are learning. You will have supporting resources in this class, so it will be easier for you to learn. During learning, if you face any issue or if you have any question, then feel free to ask me. I'm always there for you to help you out. So let's start learning the basics of AngularJS together. Welcome to a new course and a new class where I'm going to be introducing you to AngularJS. Now, as this is a new course on AngularJS, we also have to learn a bit about what AngularJS is. So, let's move on with our class. So, what is AngularJS? AngularJS is a JavaScript framework developed by Google for building dynamic web applications. It allows developers to create single-page applications, such as SPAs, by extending HTML with additional features, making it easier to build interactive and responsive user interface. Now, we have to also know about the key features of AngularJS. Now, the first key feature which we see is the two-way data binding. It automatically synchronizes data between the model and the view, so changes in one reflect in the other without extra code. Dependency injection. It simplifies the management of dependencies, making the application more modular and easier to test. Directives. Custom HTML tags or attributes that extend HTML capabilities, allowing for reusable components. MVC architecture. It follows the model view controller design pattern, promoting organized code and separation of concerns. Testing. Built with testability in mind, making it easier to write unit tests for applications. And why are you going to be using AngularJS? It's because of the efficiency, the community support, the single-page applications, and the cross-platform usage. So let's define a bit about the efficiency. It reduces the amount of code needed for common tasks, streamlining development. Community support. It is backed up by Google, so you'll be able to get a large variety and a vast amount, or let's say the vast community and also resources at the same time, which is going to provide you directly from Google with the resource and also the libraries. Single page applications. It is ideal for SPAs where quick, seamless user experiences are critical. Cross-platform can be used with other frameworks and libraries, offering flexibility in development. So now, as we know, the key features of AngularJS and also why you are going to be using or why you should use AngularJS. But now we need to also know about how we will be able to use AngularJS on our web or also on our device. But first off, we have to know a bit about the primary goals of AngularJS. Simplifying the development. It reduces the complexity of building web application by providing a framework that handles common tasks such as data binding and DOM or DOM manipulation. Enhancing user experience. Enable the creation of dynamic, responsive user interfaces, allowing for a smoother interaction without full page reloads. Modular architecture. Promote a modular approach to application development, making it easier to manage, maintain, and test code. Two-way data binding. Automatically synchronize data between the model and view, minimizing the need for manual updates and reducing boilerplate code. So, improving testability. Facilitate unit testing and end-to-end testing through built-in support for dependency injection and a clear separation of concerns. Encouraging reusability. Use directives to create reusable components and enhance maintainability across different parts of the application. Support for MVC pattern. Implement the model view controller architecture to structure applications in a way that separates data, presentation, and also logic. Cross-browser compatibility. Ensure that applications work consistently across different browsers, enhancing user accessibility. Now, I'm going to be showing you how you'll be able to use AngularJS directly in practical modes. Now, there are a couple of steps which you have to follow before you even start on doing, or let's say applying AngularJS on your web. And obviously, just like I said, as it is or as it uses the resource from Google, you'll also be able to take the libraries and resource whenever you want. And I'm also going to be showing you a couple of sites, and also you are going to need an IDE. So without any further ado, let's open up, let's say it could be any of your web browser, whichever you prefer, and also make sure to follow up whatever I do. First off, open up any web browser which you have. Now, as you can see, I am using Microsoft Edge. You will also be able to use Chrome or Opera or whichever one you prefer. So the first thing that we want to do is that we have to download an IDE. So for this class, I'm going to be using Atom. So if you want to use Atom, just search for download Atom, hit on enter. And you can see we have this over here, but you will get a lot of these. Now, there are a couple of sites where you'll be able to download it from. You can click on this, and one thing that you will see is that when you want to download it directly from their official site, it could not be like, there's like a couple of versions which are not available right now. It could be archived. So you don't have to worry about it if it shows you something like this repository has been archived. So you don't have to worry about it. You can go down and you'll find out a lot of these versions available, which you'll be able to download on your device. Now, if you don't want to download these ones, you can also go back, and there are also a couple of other sites which are very reliable. So let's say I'm going to use this site, Softonic, and from here, just click on free download on this one. I'm just going to click on this one whenever this is available. Click on this. I'm just going to click on no thanks, and it will just redirect me to this site. I'm going to click on over here. And whenever I click on this, you will basically see that the download has been started. I'm just going to block this. And there we go. It has already started downloading. Now, as I already have it downloaded on my device, now how will you be able to, let's say, install it on your device? So I'm just going to open up my downloads folder and show it to you. So as your installer will be downloaded, just double click on this Atom setup, and it will just start downloading Atom or installing Atom on your device automatically. You just have to wait for a bit until it shows up on your screen that it is downloading. So just make sure that you are also connected to the internet at the same time. Now, I'm going to be showing you a couple of other things while it is installing on my device. Okay, so the things which I want to show you is that how will you be able to use the Google, or let's say use Google for downloading, or let's say getting out resources and libraries for free, and also which is going to be very reliable. And you don't have to worry about anything else, because I'm also going to be showing you how you'll be able to open up, let's say, your own website. So first thing that you want to do is that just open up any web browser. Again, you can see Atom is already being downloaded. So I'm just going to open up Microsoft Edge again. Now, if you want to download any hosted libraries, it is also very simple. You can see that it has already been opened up. You can see. So I'm just going to close all of these failed loads. I'm just going to minimize it for now. Now, first thing that you want to do is that you want to search in over here. You're going to search for hosted libraries. Okay, just search for that, and it will show you this one or this site over here, which is going to be by developers.google.com. Now, whenever this site or this link opens up, what you want to do is just click on this link. Now, whenever you click on this link, it will show you a lot of these files which you will be able to use. Now, there is one library which you can see these are Ajax, Google APIs. So there are going to be a lot of these libraries which you will be able to use. Okay, so first thing that you want to do is that just open this up, Google Developers or hosted libraries. Now, if you just go over to this one over here, let me just go off over here. You will also find out a couple of libraries like specifically for, let's say, Atom and also using Angular JS. Okay, so sometimes it is not always available or let's say visible on the front screen. So you just have to wait for a bit and you have to search it. Okay, so I'm just gonna show it to you where you'll be able to get it directly. So if you can't find it over here, what you want to do is go back over here and you're going to search for Google Angular CDN. Okay, hit on enter. Now you'll be able to use the Google developers if you want to. You can see which CDN for Google, or let's say Angular JS is better. So there are like couple of these snippets or scripts which you'll be able to use. So when you just go on to hosted libraries, you'll be able to find out a lot of these are basically for Angular JS, but it's not in nothing over here is anything specifically for Angular JS. So it basically depends on you if you rather want to use it or not, but because these ones are like very modern, okay, and there's like a couple of versions which you'll be able to use and you'll be able to work with them very flexibly. Okay, so if you want to use only the specific ones or CDNs for Angular JS, there's also like a couple of other sites. You can see these ones are totally free and these ones are also from Angular JS. So there are like a couple of these ones which you will find out over here, but most of them are going to be from Cloudflare. So you also have to check those out if you want to. You can see these ones are from Ajax, Google APIs. Okay, so it depends on you if you want to use it. Now, I'm also going to be showing you a specific one, which is also going to be free, but in a couple of regions, it is not. So you can try typing it out if you want to, but if you don't want to, that's also fine. You can also try out the ones or the CDNs, which are totally free for you. So I'm just going to keep these aside. And another thing that you want to do is I just minimized it. Now, what I'm going to do is that I have this new folder over here, and here I'm going to create a new file. Okay. So this is going to be the test file. So I'm just going to put in test. Okay. I'm going to go off on test. I'm going to sort it. Let's say I'm just going to sort it or view it on medium icons. Okay. So what I want to do over here is that I'm going to create a text document. Now here in the text document, I'm just going to put in test. Well, let's say I'm just not even going to do anything over here. I'm just going to remove this. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to open up Atom. Okay. So as I've opened up Atom, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on File. And first thing that you want to do is Open Folder. Now, when you have Open Folder over here, you want to go off to, let's say I'm just going to go off the desktop, test file. Okay. Select the folder. So there we go. We have it totally prepared. I'm just going to close out these ones because we are not going to be needing these. Okay. So this is how it should look like. You can also make sure it is in maximum or full screen. Now inside this test folder, I'm going to create a new file. Now the name of the file which I'm going to give it is going to be test.html. Let's just open up this new file. Okay. So this is basically the untitled file which I'm using. You can see this one is over here. You can also open this up, click on new file. I'm going to put in test.html. Hit on enter. So there we go. We have this test.html file. Now, obviously, we know how to create the basic structure of the HTML. So first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to open this up. And here I want to put in this, and I'm going to put in doc type. There we go. Doc type HTML. And now you want to put in the HTML code. Okay. So there we go. We have it all prepared. It is also very simple to just apply it just by using the tab. So as we have the structure ready, now there are a couple of things that you need to know when you are applying any script or any data inside, let's say, the HTML file to make sure that your AngularJS is working properly. Now, in this class, I'm going to be showing you something very simple, and it's also going to be very practical, which you'll be able to use to make sure or check it out if your AngularJS file is working properly or not. So after this class ends, I would suggest you that try to, do it on your own, and also make sure to apply these things and, just practice and test it out if it works. Okay. So first thing that we want to do is that we have the charset. You can see UTF-8. So we also have the title right underneath. Now inside of the title, or let's say in the head. Okay. So in the head of the HTML file, we are going to be putting in a couple of scripts. So here I'm going to put in, let's say, script. There we go. We have the script type. You can see there is like 2 of them. So I'm just going to remove one of these. I'm going to make sure that this one is also, adjacent to the title tag. Okay. So inside the script, I'm going to be putting in not JavaScript. I'm just going to cut this off. And after script, I'm just going to put in src because we are going to be needing a specific source. So inside the source, I'm going to be putting in one of the CDN, which we have over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy one of these, Control C, just copy it. We have this AngularJS. So I'm going to paste it out. Okay. So this is the CDN, which we are going to be using for AngularJS. Now, after this, or make sure that this specific CDN is inside of double quotation. Okay. So as your double quotation is closed, just make sure to close off the tag of script. Okay. So after that, what I want to do is I'm just going to make sure that this script is also over here. Okay, it just looks a bit more better, and we also have more space to it. Now I'm going to be creating another script. There we go. We have another script ready. So what I want to do over here is that we are going to have the JavaScript. Okay, so this is the JavaScript which we are going to be using. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put it over here. But another thing that you can do inside of this script is that we are going to be putting in a specific sample, which is going to derive the Angular model. So I'm just going to put in Angular. I'm going to put in dot module. Okay, so Angular module, open up the parentheses, and inside of the parentheses, I'm going to put in a specific sample. Okay, there we go. We have the specific sample. In the specific sample, what I want to do is put in a comma. And right after that comma, what you want to do is close it off, second bracket. That's it. Make sure it is also closed off. And obviously make sure that you have this mark at the end. Now, inside of the head, or let's say after the head and inside of the body, you want to derive or specify what type of app do you want. And it's going to be AngularJS. So when you are using AngularJS, well, I'm also going to be, let's say describing everything or every line that we have over here. And another thing is that if this specific source does not work, I'm also going to be providing you with a specific, let's say, source, which you'll be able to apply to make sure that your app is working properly. Okay. So in this ng, I'm going to put in ng, and I'm also going to be describing it to you why I'm using this. So just type in ng app and type in equal. And after equal, what you want to do is you want to derive or put in this specific sample. Okay. So this is the specific sample which we are going to be working with. Now, what I want to do inside of this app is that I'm going to sum two specific numbers. Okay. So here I'm just going to put in, let's say, sum of two numbers. Okay. Sum of two numbers, open up the parentheses. Now we also need a specific variable. So we're going to specify as 1 plus 2. Now, this is not the exact number. You have to keep that thing in mind. Now, when you are working with the exact number, 1 and 2 is, open up the third brackets. Make sure to open up two third brackets. Put in a bit of space. And here I want to put in 30 plus, let's say, 20. Okay, this is it. Now what you want to do is that you have to save up the file. Save it. Okay, now let's just open up the test file. You can see we have this one over here. You can see this is also an Angular or HTML file. Now if you open this up, it's just going to take a bit of time to open it up on any of your browser. So it depends on whichever browser you want to use, and I'm using Arc. So if you want to use it, you can also try it out. It's also quite fast. And you can see it is just giving out, let's say, whatever data we have inside of our, let's say, web. Okay. So when we have this inside of the web, what we want to do is that we have to run it inside of a test file. So what we want to do is that we have to also change the way we are opening it up or opening it up on our browser. So after refreshing it a couple of times, you'll basically see that it is going to give you out like the exact answer that you need. So the first number was 30 and the second number was 20, just as you've seen. Now, there are also a couple of other steps which you can follow up. Now, in some cases, what happens is that the CDN, or let's say the script which you are using, might not work properly. So what you basically want to do is that you have to open up a new tab. I'm just going to go off to Microsoft Edge so that you can see it. Okay, so I'm going to cut out these ones. Now, what you want to do is you want to download AngularJS on your device. So just type in download AngularJS. Okay. So whenever you just download this, you can see we have the AngularJS org. So just open up their site and you will basically see that this is how it should look like. Okay, so just click on download AngularJS and there you go. We have the exact CDN which you want to use or which you will be able to use on any of your text editor, or let's say the IDE. So you can just copy this. And whenever you have copied it, what you want to do is you want to paste it on the script. So let's just open up Atom. And there you can see we are still using the exact number and it has already given us the result. Okay, so what you want to do is that there are a couple of steps, just like I said, and I'm just going to help you out so that you don't have any confusion like starting off. Okay, so first thing, as you already have the HTML structure, what you want to do is you want to put in the script, which is basically going to help you to load in the module. Okay, so now let's say I want to concatenate two data, and it's going to be very simple for me to do so. And how am I going to do it? I'm just going to put a couple of other things. Let's say I'm just going to add another file to it. Let's say I'm going to say a new folder, or let's say new file. Here I'm going to put in index.html. Okay, so I have created another file and I'm just going to put in, let's say, HTML. There we go. We have all of these over here. I'm just going to cut out this one because I'm not going to be needing that. So here inside of HTML, we are also not going to be needing the meta. Okay, this is like, optional, totally optional. Now here inside of the head, okay, we have the exact title and I want to name the title Angular. Okay, I'm just going to put in Angular. There we go. Now we have the head over here, and inside of the body opening tag, you want to define it using ng and then put in a hyphen and then put in f. Okay, that's all you need to do. Now the next thing that you want to do over here, I'm just going to put in, let's say, script. Okay, I'm just going to cut this off. There we go. And here, what I want to do is I'm just going to paste in the specific value. There we go. This is the AngularJS CDN, which we are using right now. So I'm just going to go off to Atom again. There we go. Now here, what I'm going to do is instead of type, you can also put in source if you want to, but you can also work with type if you want to. Okay. Now the next thing right after script, what you want to do is that you want to put in the exact data that you want to concatenate. So whenever you are trying to concatenate data together, what you want to do is put in double third brackets, put in, let's say, this double quotation. And here I'm going to put in hello, put in plus, space, plus, double quotation again, and put in a bit of space if you want to, world, double quotation to close it off. Okay, so as we've closed it off, now you want to save up this file, save. Now I'm going to go off to, let's say, show in Explorer, index, open this up, and you might see something like this. Okay, there we go. This has already concatenated a bit of it, but if there's a bit of issue, we're going to be fixing it out. There we go. Double quotation. Okay, so let's just save up the file again. So if you just open up this file, you can see now we have our hello world, but there is something over here which is not showing us the data properly. But now you know how you'll be able to concatenate these data. Now there's also another way of how you'll be able to, change a couple of things inside of the script or inside of the HTML file which you are working on. So what you want to do is open up Atom again. So let's just open up that one again. You can see this is just how it is. Now we have the type. So first thing that you want to do is you want to describe the type. So another thing that I'm going to do over here, put in another double quotation. I'm just going to put in, let's say, text. text, and then put in slash, and then put in JavaScript. Okay. After that, what you want to do is after this quotation ends, you want to put in src to define the exact source which you are working with. Okay. That's it. And then what you want to do is obviously run the whole thing back again. So what you want to do first is save up the file and obviously open it up in Explorer. There we go, index, open this up, and there we go. It is working the exact same way. So this is how you'll be able to change the data or work with numbers. And this is how you'll be able to concatenate alphabets or the text type. Okay, so this is how simple it is, and hope you understood about everything in this class on how you'll be able to work with numbers, concatenating them, summing them. You can also change the data. Let's say here I'm going to put in 70. Okay, so obviously make sure to put in 70. First off, you have to save up the file. And another thing that you can do over here is that take up the source. Okay. Control C. You can also use it right over here. There we go. Now let's just save up this file again. And obviously open up the Explorer. There we go. As the Explorer is open, let's just open this up. And you can see 70 plus 30 is 100. Okay. So thank you for watching this video up till the very end, and hope you understood about everything in this class on how you'll be able to apply AngularJS on your web application or on web. And if you have any confusion or any question, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of AngularJS. Welcome to the second class of AngularJS. In my previous class, I've shown you about AngularJS and how you'll be able to apply AngularJS on your web and how you'll be able to make it functional. Well, this is kind of like an intermediate class, but if you still have no, let's say, previous experience on using AngularJS, then you don't have to worry about it, because in this course, I'm going to cover everything that you need to know about AngularJS. And also, I'm going to start off from scratch, and then I'm going to gradually, let's say, move on to the intermediate level so that you will be able to understand it and also apply it in daily use and also for your career purpose. So, in my previous class, I've shown you how you'll be able to apply AngularJS, but you don't know, or I still have not defined anything about the command lines in AngularJS and how those actually work. So in this class, I'm going to cover everything that you need to know about understanding the command lines of AngularJS. And these previous classes are very important for you to understand more clearly about the lines, and it's also going to help you later on in these courses. So without any further ado, let's open up that test file again, and let's show you and also define everything that you need to know about the command lines. So welcome back, and we have opened up the test.html file, and we also have the index.html file side to side. Now, the first thing that we need to know about the, let's say, we're going to be talking about the command lines. Now, one of the most important thing is going to be about the module, or let's say the source. Okay. Now, the source is going to be the script or the snippet, which we basically have gathered online, or you can also use local CDNs if you want to. So the CDN which we have used is specifically this specific line. Okay, this is basically the refer to AngularJS library. You can either get it locally or from CDN such as Google or any other, let's say, API such as Cloudflare, You can also use 1 if you want to. So you have to keep that thing in mind. It is basically going to help you to save up or set up your library in working more into AngularJS. Now, the next thing that we are going to be talking about is going to be the Angular module. Now, the Angular module is going to be based on what CDN you are using. If we go off, let's just go off to any of our browser again. Let's go off to Google Angular CDN, such as maybe this one. Now, even if I want to download, let's say I'm going to download AngularJS. Okay, I'm just going to open this up. I'm just going to click on this and I'm going to click on download AngularJS. There we go. We have the CDN over here. Now, even though we have the CDN over here, it has not given us any, like, let's say, external module, but you will be able to browse additional modules just like this. So in these cases, you'll be able to use all of these modules that you want to work with. And the exact module that we are working with is Angular module, which you can see in node.js. We have put in Angular module for our sample. Okay, so you can see Angular.module. Okay, this is basically going to help you with a specific name. You also have to define it step by step, and you also have to check out which specific module or which specific CDN you are working to make your application. Now, there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. The Angular module is all application logic under one umbrella. So, depending on which CDN you are using, it's going to work up with that specific module. So when we are using this specific script, it is also defining, or this specific module is also inside of this, let's say, script or snippet. Okay, so make sure to check that out, or make sure to always do a bit more of the research when you are working with AngularJS. Okay, because let's say the module and the script is also going to be intertwined together, because if the module is not inside the CDN, it will not work properly, and you also have to check out which version you are working with. If second parameter is provided in example square bracket, we are going to create a new module. You can see we have used this second bracket over here, which is basically defining which number we are using. Well, we're going to go through that in a bit later and how it is intertwined with one another. If second parameter is not provided, we are accessing existing or already created module. If we did not use this specific bracket, and if we did not put this specific, let's say, keyword such as this being used over here, and this one is also connected to this one, if we did not do that, it would not be working properly, because we are using a specific module, and also inside of this we are using the secondary bracket over here to define a new keyword, which is going to be intertwined together to give us the exact result that we need. Okay, so now you can see that we have put in just 100 over here. But whenever you are putting the third bracket just like this, as I've shown you in my previous class on how you'll be able to work up to, let's say, 20 plus, let's say I'm just going to put in plus, I'm just going to put in plus over here, or let's say minus, whichever one you prefer. So if I put in minus and 10, it's also going to give us 10 as the answer if I save it up. Okay, and it's also going to check out which type of script you are working with. Is it a text or is it a number? You can also put in numbers over here or numericals if you want to, but make sure that it is on JavaScript. Okay, then empty square brackets mean the module has no dependencies on other module. If you did not, let's say, put in these brackets, you can see the parentheses, then it means that there are no dependencies on other modules either. So if you want to work with, let's say, new modules, make sure to put in this specific, let's say, the parentheses or the bracket, and also make sure to put in the square bracket if you are using any specific keyword to define the whole function, or let's say the whole command line. Now, the next thing that we are going to be talking about is going to be one of the most important thing in Angular JS. While working or customizing the body of your HTML, or let's say your website, make sure to put in ng, then let's say dash app. So it is basically a decorate, or let's say decoration of an element with the ng app. Now the ng app is equal to Angular application. So when you put ng app inside of a body or the command line of an HTML, or let's say while creating, let's say a website, or let's say the web page, it basically defines Angular application being used. It is the root where Angular starts applying its magic. So if you want to work with Angular JS, even if you did put the script, or let's say the snippet, the source, the CDN, the module, everything, but if you did not put ng app inside of your body while creating your web page, it's not going to work. So make sure to obviously put in ng app whenever you are using Angular JS inside or on your web. Usually one ng app per web page. So if you are creating another web page just like this one, you can see I also use this one over here. Okay, so it basically defines that I have to use ng app, and also in the test HTML, I also have to put in ng app to define the structure and also to start up Angular JS. Multiple ng apps on the same web page is still possible. You will also be able to work with multiple ng app, and you'll be able to put more ng app over here or maybe down below. But whatever or how many you use, it doesn't matter. Wherever you start off the ng app, let's say maybe I created a body over here, but if I just create another body, then that one or that body will not have the ng app or neither work with any modules. So you'll be able to put in multiple ng app or multiple Angular, let's say application module, or let's say the function like multiple times. ng app cannot be nested. If you want to use ng app or this specific keyword or this specific module as a nested value, then it will not work. So make sure to put it open and independent. It can be attached to any HTML element, but usually to body or HTML tags. So basically, I'll be able to work with multiple like bodies right inside of one web page. But the most easiest method, if you want to work with ng app through the whole web page, just put it inside of the HTML, just like this, ng app. Now, everything or whatever you put inside of this web page will have the module or will work with, let's say, an Angular module, or let's say the Angular application. So you don't have to put it inside of the body tag of HTML. ng app is also associated to an Angular module called root module. So you have to understand that the root module is basically the ng app. So if you do not put ng app, but you are working with specific CDNs or specific modules, it will still not work. Now, the next thing that I want to show you in the test.html file is that how I am using a specific expression to define my ng, or let's say Angular application. So whenever you are putting in ng app and putting in a specific keyword to define, or let's say work with Angular JS, so you basically have to put in 2 third brackets over here to define an expression. So whenever you are using double third bracket inside, or let's say working with the ng app, it defines the expression. So the expression is also defined with Angular expression. JavaScript-like code snippets evaluated by Angular. So whenever you are using 2 of these, it is already intertwined with Angular JS, And obviously make sure to put in the ng app beforehand so that it is already connected together and you don't have to put in extra command lines or codes. And that is why you have higher scopes of reusability. Control flow statements, conditional statement loops, etc. are not allowed. So if you use conditional statements such as specific function, let's say to define any specific app or maybe any specific source, you will not be able to use it. You have to put it directly, but you have to make sure that it is independent. And you will also not be able to use loops. It is because when you already apply, let's say just in case, if I put an ng app over here, you don't have to put ng app on all of these tags over and over again. And it is also not allowed, which in case might show you off as an error and it will not work properly. So now you know everything, or let's say most of the things about the command lines in AngularJS are working with AngularJS on HTML. So hope you understood about everything in this class. If you have any question or any confusion about any part of these lessons, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So make sure to practice on your own. Check it out, and if you still face any issues, feel free to tell me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of AngularJS. Welcome to another class of AngularJS. In my previous classes, I've shown you about the introduction of how you'll be able to use basic AngularJS on the web using HTML and also understanding about the command lines. Well, in this class, I'm going to give you out the brief explanation and also with an example of what are controllers and how to use them in AngularJS. So let's get into our class. In AngularJS, controllers are JavaScript functions that are used to build the application's data model and manage the data flow between the model and the view. They serve as the bridge between the view HTML and the model data, allowing you to define the data should be displayed and how the user interacts with it. Now, let's look at the key features of the controllers in AngularJS. Scope, which is also, let's say, intertwined or written with the $sign. Controllers use the scope object, which is the context for model. The scope object can hold data and functions that can be accessed in the view. Data binding. Changes to the model data in scope are automatically reflected in the view and vice versa, thanks to AngularJS's two-way data binding. Encapsulation. Controllers help encapsulate behavior and functionality, making the code more organized and also reusable. Well, just like I said, being reusable, I'm just going to show that to you in just a bit when we get into more of the practical classes. Dependency injection. AngularJS supports dependency injection, allowing you to inject services and other dependencies into controllers, making it easier to manage the dependencies. Controllers are essential for managing data and user interaction in AngularJS applications, promoting a structured approach to building web application. So now, as we know a bit more about controllers, so let's get into our class and show you about the practical thing that you will be able to apply controllers and how you are going to make it functional inside of your web. As you can see from my screen, I have opened up Atom. Now, if you want to use any different IDE such as Visual Studio Code or let's say Sublime Text, you'll be able to use them. It's like not a big issue. So the first thing that I want to do over here is inside of this test folder, I want to create another file. So right click on this and click on new file. You can also just press on A. Now the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to put in 01.html. You can also put in HTML if you want to, but I just prefer putting in HTML. Now hit on enter. And there we go. We have created another HTML file. Now what I'm going to do over here, I'm just going to copy all of these codes and I'm just going to paste it over here. Now, one thing that you can see over here is that I have reused everything over here. And it's also defining an Angular application. By the end of this class, or by the end of, let's say, this whole command is finished, I'm also going to be showing you how and what, let's say, the controllers are and how do they functions. And also I'm going to give you out the brief explanation of each and every one of them. Now, the first thing that we already have the script, or let's say the script type. Now, if you're still not sure about which script you are going to be using, so you can just type in download AngularJS again, AngularJS, which I most of the time opened up, and I also opened it up in my previous class. So it's going to be very easy for you. You can just click on this AngularJS and you can see this is the CDN. Just copy that up and you can also download it up if you want to. You can see this is the downloaded file. What you can do is just paste this inside, let's say, your terminal, and it's going to be installed on your var. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that we already have the copy, or let's say we already have the code, so I'm just going to paste it over here. There we go. We have, let's say, the CDN. Now we also have the script over here, and we also have the text and JavaScript over here. Now, the most important thing that you see over here is that we are using the Angular module, and then we have the sample. So basically, this sample or this keyword is basically the controller. Well, we're going to be like explaining more about each and every one of these command lines after the whole thing has been done. So I'm just going to keep this like, Angular module sample, comma, then second bracket, open and close off the parentheses, which you can see over here, and put in this colon. Now, one thing that I want to like extra add over here is going to be as a variable. So when you are working with a specific variable, just type in var, that's it. And it's going to put in, or let's say I'm going to work with a specific app equal Angular module. Okay, this is going to be it. Now, as we have this totally prepared, now we have another script. You can see we have the script type. Now you can see this is, or let's say everything is inside of this script. Now we are basically not done with this because we are going to be creating the app controller inside of this script. So everything, or every one of the controllers is going to go inside of the type. Okay, the script type, not the script source. Okay, so here you're going to type in app.controller. There we go, app.controller. Open up the parentheses, and inside of the parentheses, you are going to define it as, let's say, emp, empower, comma, and you are going to define the function. There we go. And after the function, open up the parentheses again. Let's say I'm going to open up the parentheses and also close off the parentheses, and inside, let's say I'm going to, not inside, outside of this, just put in a third bracket. There we go. Now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be defining the controller. So when you are defining a controller inside of AngularJS, you have to put in this dot and then put in whatever variables you want. Let's say, just in case, I'm going to put in, let's say, ID. This dot ID. Also, I'm just going to put in just ID over here. Okay, this dot ID is going to be equal to a specific value. Let's say I'm going to say, let's say I'm just going to put in Susan. Okay, Susan. I'm just going to put in, let's say, identity. Okay, So there we go. We have created our controller and also our variable. So as we are done with this variable, what I want to do is I want to close this off. Okay. And make sure to end the script. So as we have ended the script, what I want to do is that make sure to put in the ng app and also define the specific sample. Now, what I want to do is that after that, inside of the head, which you can see over here, now we don't have any other specific, you can see we have the body inside of the head. We also have the body over here. Okay. So what I want to do is that right after the body, which we see over here as the ng app, I'm going to be creating a deviation tag. So right after the sample, just type in the div tag. Div, close off the div. There we go. Now inside of this div tag, or let's say I'm just not going to be closing it. I'm just going to put in the ng controller. Ng controller. There we go. It is already, let's say, suggesting me. And here you want to put in the specific variable emp as, let's say, I'm going to put in I. Okay. Emp as I. And then I'm going to close it off. There we go. Now, as we have closed it off, now you're going to be defining what you want and how you want it to be visible. I'm going to close it off. There we go. Just cut this off. And here, I'm going to be first off defining. So here I'm going to put in hello and then put in third bracket 2 times. And I'm going to put in I dot because I'm using I as the specific keyword to define our controller. So I dot, and then you have to put in identity over here. Control C, Control V. There we go. And you also want to end it off with a punctuation mark. Okay, exclamation mark over here. And then you want to close off the div tag. That's how easy it is. Div. So basically you are almost done with all of these. Now what you want to do is you want to save up this file. And as you have saved up this file, what you want to do is that you just have to go to Explorer. Let's just open up the Explorer. Now, if we just open this up, and you'll be able to see that it's going to show me hello Susan. And at the same time, if we just open up this over here, you can see this is how it should look like. Okay, so there we go. We have hello Susan. Now it's just the first variable that we have applied. So what if I want to concatenate more data with it? It's also very simple. Now we just have to basically create more, let's say, more of those variables and more of those controllers to add it up to our data. So that is basically very simple. Just follow up these steps. Just open up Atom. And here, what I want to do is that we have this dot identity, right? This is the controller. Now, what I want to do is that I'm going to create another one. So I'm going to put in this. I'm going to put in dot. And I'm going to put in, let's say, age. Okay. The age of Susan, which I'm going to put, is going to be somewhere around, let's say, 23. Okay. That's all. Now, another thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you are working with multiple of these controllers, make sure to close off the previous one with this. And you also have to do the same thing over here. Now, even if I save up this file, let's say I'm going to save up this file, and even if I refresh this, it's not going to have any changes to it. I'm going to close this off. I'm going to close this one off too. Now, what I basically have to do over here is that I have to also apply it in this div tag. So what I basically have to do is that here I'm going to cut this off, comma, right after it. I'm going to put in, let's say, isn't, or let's say I'm going to put in, I heard that your age is, and then what you want to do is just put in the third bracket 2 more times again. I dot. Now you have to put in this specific keyword, which is going to define the age. So I'm going to put in age over here. So basically you are done. Okay. Now what you want to do is you have to basically save up this file. And now if I just go off over here and if I refresh this, you can see that it has already given me the data. So basically that is how simple it is. Now you can just keep on going. Now the last thing that I want to add is, let's say this dot, let's say nationality. So I'm just going to put in nat equal. I'm just going to put in equal over here. And here I'm going to put in, let's say, I'm going to put in British. Close it off. I'm going to put in a full stop over here. I also heard that your parents are. Now, another thing that I want to show you over here is that what if I change this value? If I put in Y over here and the other ones are going to be the same, but if I just put in, let's say, again, I dot net, and if I save up this file, and if I refresh this, you can see this is how it will show me. Because now the specific variable which I'm working or as the controller has been changed into a different variable. So what you basically have to do is you just have to go off to Atom right over here. I'm just going to increase the size of this. And here on each and every one of them, I'm just going to put in Y. Y. And also Y over here. That's it. Now I'm just going to reduce the size. I'm just going to save up the file. And if I just refresh it, you can still see it is still showing me the same thing. So I'm going to open up Atom again. You can see Y, EMP as Y. Okay. So we have this Y as the sample. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save up the file again. I'm going to, let's say, I'm going to close it off, go off to my Explorer again and open this up. And if you still see this, or let's say working just the way it is, then basically what you have to do is you have to remove it again and you have to put in another variable. So these are kind of like some pros and cons of using AngularJS. So what I basically have to do is I have to put in I again. I'm going to put in I over here. I'm just going to put in I over here again. Increase the size. And I'm also going to be putting in I over here. That's it. That's all you basically have to do. I'm going to save up this file. Go off on my browser. Remove this. And if I just go off an Explorer, you can see, if I just open this up, and it's still showing me this value. So I'm just going to minimize it. And if I just remove this specific value, and if I just save this up, you can see. And if I just go back to my browser and refresh it a couple of times. So after refreshing a couple of times, you'll basically see that it will give you out the data. Now, another limitation of using these controllers and applying them on your web is that in some of the modules, it will not apply, or let's say using more than 2 controller is not possible. But you have to find out the exact, let's say, controller, which actually gives you out the specific value and also gives you out the exact result that you need. But as I am using the latest version, even though there could be some limitations to it, but you can still see that I'm still using the I.nationality and also defining this one over here as the controller. And also I'm going to be, or let's say I'm using each and every one of them as a specific variable to control my controllers in AngularJS. So hope you understood about everything in this class, but I also have a couple of things that I'm going to be explaining to you in this. Okay, so let's start off from the basics or each and every one of these command lines, because this is going to be very helpful if you work or maybe even make your own controllers in AngularJS. Now, the first thing that we are going to be talking about is the controllers are basically JavaScript objects which contain application logic, usually defined as part of the Angular module. Now, the part of the Angular module that we are working with is the sample. You can see we have the exact sample. So the sample that we are using is called the app over here. Now, the app over here is also being used over here. And everything inside of this is being, let's say, it basically allows us to send or receive data between DOM, say views, and also application logic. It usually it is attached to a DOM element using the ng controller right over here, which you can see as the EMP. It is basically concatenating, or let's say it is intertwining, which specific variable am I going to show as, let's say, the controller. So as you can see, I'm using I as this over here, and we are using specific variables for each and every one of these data. So it is basically kind of very directive. Okay, it basically gets instantiated. Okay, so you have to make sure what the instance is, and the instance which we are using is I. But you can use different one of them, like whichever one you prefer. So in other words, exposes data which is specifically the model of the instance, like I, and it is intertwined with which variable we are using. So it is to be consumed by views in one-way data binding, but this one does not have two-way data binding. So you have to make sure to keep that thing in mind. It also takes data from views. Two-way data binding will cover up. Okay, so basically the module is the controller and the markup is the view. So what happens is when you have the first view, which is basically the data, it goes into the controller as the model. And the model is also being supplied with the web service, and the web service is taking and also giving data inside of the Google databases. So thank you for watching this video up till the very end, and hope you understood about everything in this class. The only thing that you have to do after watching these videos is that just make sure to do it, or let's say practice it on your own, so that you can also progress with work and also keep up the skills and keep on developing at the same time. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of AngularJS. Welcome to another class of AngularJS. In this class, we're going to be learning about scope and its relationship with controller or view in AngularJS. Well, if you didn't check out my previous video properly, and if you still have any confusion or questions about the previous class where I have completed or showed you everything that you need to know about the scope and also a bit of the controller, so I would suggest you that practice out the previous class a bit more better and also try it out on your own, because that class is also going to be connected to this class, and we're also going to be reusing the commands that we've used in my previous class. But before getting into more practical lessons, we have to learn a bit more about its advantages, why it is used, and what is scope and its relationship with controller/view. In AngularJS, scope is a core concept that acts as a bridge between the controller and the view. Here's how it works and its relation to controller and view. So what is scope? The object of scope is that it is a JavaScript object that represents the application module. It holds the data that the view needs to display on your web, or let's say on your screen. Let's talk about the context. It provides the context for expressions in the view, making it possible to bind data to the specific UI, whichever one you are using. Relation with the controller. Controller initialization. When a controller is instantiated, a new scope object is created for it. The scope is passed as an argument to the controller function. So I have also attached in a specific command line such as app controller. You're going to name the function, or let's say name it. Let's say I named it my controller, and the function is going to be that specific scope. Now, when you are creating your own function, obviously you have to put an extra parentheses inside of your function, and you have to define it inside of the application. And all of these are going to be going inside of the ng app, because if you do not use the ng app tag, it will basically not work. So when you are basically defining the variable, you also have to define the scope and dot and that specific variable that you want to use to connect to the controller. Now, when I am using the scope dot greeting, which you can see over here, is that I am defining what specific keyword. If I am using text JavaScript, I will be able to put any text inside of it. So whenever I try to, let's say, view or let's say represent any specific text just by using AngularJS on my web, I have to define that specific scope. Now let's talk about the data binding. Any properties you define on scope can be accessed directly in the view. For example, in the HTML. So when you have put it inside of the div tag and you also have, let's say, explained or defined the ng controller, let's say the app. Now you can still see that my controller is also the same thing, or let's say the same one inside of this controller inside of my div tag. So when I am trying to put any specific text, or let's say when I try to put any specific word, or let's say a sentence inside of my web, and I also want to use the scope function to use the controller as a variable, I have to define it using two, let's say, third brackets. Okay, just like you can see on my third line over here in the parentheses, or let's say inside of my paragraph text. Okay, and inside you can also see right beside it, this will display hello world. Okay, so the greeting tag, or let's say the greeting function that I'm using, is going to be defining this specific variable or the specific keyword which we are using as the controller. So in my previous classes, I've shown you how you'll also be able to use EMP, or let's say a specific instance. But in this class, I'm going to be showing you how you'll be able to define that specific function to use scope and also find the relation between the controller and also the view. And then you are just going to close off the div tag or whatever tag you are using to, let's say, specify any specific keyword or present anything inside of your web. Two-way data binding. Changes made in the view, like user input, automatically updates the corresponding scope properties and also vice versa. Relation with view. Expression evaluation. The view can access and manipulate the data on scope using AngularJS expressions. In example, let's say just expressions. Now you will also be able to use instances and also specific variables to define or represent any specific value inside of your web. Directives. Many directives like ng model, ng repeat, or let's say ng app, which is one of the most important thing, and also ng controller, rely on scope to manage data binding and also the DOM manipulation. Scope hierarchy. Child scope. When using nested controllers, a child scope can inherit properties from its parent scope. This allows for a hierarchical data structure, such as app controller, then define that specific app, whichever you are using, and then you have to define the function with either a scope or maybe an instance. So in my previous class, I've shown you using any specific alphabet for using it as an instance. But when you are using that as an instance, you also have to use the command emp. So scope.parent value. So as we are using a parent, let's say hierarchy or parent scope, then you also have to define any specific text which you want to define inside of the web. And then you can also use multiple app controllers to define the child controller. And you also have to define that child controller as the function and also define the scope. And then you are going to put the variable which you want to put inside of the web. So that's all you need to know about the relation. Now, let's just go a bit to the summary. Scope connects controllers and also views, enabling data binding and also the interaction. Changes in the view update the scope, and the changes in scope update the view thanks to two-way data binding for Angular JS. Well, it can also be done in Dojo or Census, let's say JS, but it's a lot more easier when you are using Angular JS and also having two-way data binding. It also supports hierarchical structures, allowing for organized data management in complex applications. Overall, scope is fundamental for building dynamic and interactive web application in Angular JS. So hope you understood about everything up till now. So now let's get more into the practical parts of how you'll be able to use scope and to find the, let's say, the connection or the relation between the view and also the controller with scope. And obviously by the end of the practical class, or let's say the end of the practical lesson, and also after I'm done showing you how you'll be able to define and also represent your data just by using Angular JS and also scopes, then I'm going to define more about the lines which you need to know to, let's say, make your own functions and also to define your own scopes when you are creating your own dynamic and interactive web application. So let's move into our class by opening up any IDE such as Node.js or let's say Node on my device. So as you can see that I have opened up Node. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is that I'm just going to close off each and every one of them because I'm going to be using an external, or let's say I'm going to be using an extra one. But one thing that I'm going to do is just I'm going to open up the one.html. Now, you can also define or name your own files just the way you prefer, but I just prefer using it just like this. I'm going to be creating a new file, and here I'm going to be typing in, let's say, I'm going to type in rlt.html. Okay, rlt.html. Now, one thing that I'm going to do over here, I'm just going to copy each and every one of them, Control C, and I'm just going to paste it inside of this. And I'm going to close off the 0.1 or 01 HTML. Now, one thing that you want to do over and over again, each and every time you are working with any script or any snippet of, let's say, Angular JS, is make sure to check out the versions. Okay, now there are a couple of versions that you will find online. Now let's just go off to any of the web browser, and if I just search in for download, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna open it up or keep it opened up for most of the cases or most of the classes. Download Angular JS, and obviously you can try downloading on your device if you want to, but just copy this and make sure to put the same thing over here, okay? Because it's going to have all of the effects, okay? And you will also be able to use your own modules and let's say the versions of which Angular JS CDN you are using. And another thing to make sure to keep in mind is make sure the type is text/JavaScript. Okay, now inside of the var app, we have angular.module, and we also have defined the specific sample. Now, but one thing you can see that there is nothing inside of it because we are going to be creating our own function. Now we can see we have the app.controller, we also have the EMP, and now the most important thing about the relation when you are working with the connection between them is that most of the time we have kept this bracket like, empty, right? But when you are trying to find out the function, or let's say the connection between them, or let's say the connection or the relation between the scope and also, let's say, the controller, you have to define the scope over here. So just type in $sign and then type in scope. Okay, so that is going to define the scope inside of your, let's say, function. Now, another thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to cut this off, and we're not going to be needing all of these variables because we are going to be defining a different thing right now. Now, here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to type in the $scope. Okay, $scope dot identity. Now we are using specific name, let's say Susan. Now, another thing that you want to do is that in the div tag over here, you are not going to be defining any specific instance. So when we remove the specific instance, now what I basically have to do is I'm going to remove all of these. Let's say I'm going to cut this off. And what I'm going to be changing over here is I'm just going to cut out this instance, because now we are not using any EMP or empower for any instance, but we are specifically using any specific, let's say, variable for our module. Now, if you want to basically open this up, what you basically have to do is you have to save up this file and you have to open it up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save up this file and I'm going to open up in Explorer. You can see Explorer opened. And if I open this up, RLT, you can see we have the specific text, hello, Susan. Now, even if I just change this value, let's say here, I'm going to change this into Alice. Now, if I just save up this file, and if I just, I'm just going to refresh this, you can see we still have Alice over here. Now, you will also be able to use multiple of them, but in some cases, in some modules, it does not support multiple scopes. So if I try to define another one, let's just try it. Now I have to check it, scope dot, let's say, RT. RT is equal. I'm just going to copy this over here, Control C, Control V, and I'm going to define that specific, let's say I'm going to put any specific number. If I type in 200, make sure to close it off. And I put in here is put in double third bracket and then put in RT. That's it. That's all you need to put. Okay, because this is a Ruby pronunciation. Now, when I put in RT over here, it is already putting up, or let's say, just finding up what it is connected to. I'm just going to put in $. Now I'm going to save the file. And now I basically have to check it if it works. So you can see it basically works. But in some cases, you will not be able to use a third variable. So if I just put in another one, but it might also work. It depends on the module, whichever one you are using. But if it works, then you can just go on putting in more variables. So if I just put in YU is going to be equal to, let's say, I'm just going to put in thanks for being here. And here, I'm just going to put in another comma. And instead of putting anything, I'm just going to define it just by putting in YU. That's it. Now, if I just save up this file, it will either show you an error, or let's say this specific line, or it will show you the exact text. Okay, so if this works, that it means that you are using the most updated version. And obviously, there are a couple of fixes where you'll be able to use multiple variables inside of your web. And you can also represent it inside of your, let's say, your web. Okay, now the next thing that I want to do is that if I try to change my function into a specific, let's say, if I want to use any specific instance, I can also try it out. But when you want to change that specific instance, you also have to change it inside of your command lines. Such as if I put something like, let's say I'm going to use V. Okay, so I'm just going to put in V. So what you're going to do is I'm just going to put in V over here, just like I did in my previous class. Put in V. I'm just going to put the same thing over here, but in V. Okay, So when you want to use V, and now if I save up this file, now we are not using any scope. So if I open up my website and just, refresh it, you can see that it is not showing me how I want it to be. So when you want to change up the way it looks like, then you basically have to define the scope beforehand so that it basically functions properly. So what you basically have to do is, first off, you have to define the scope beforehand. And there are a couple of different methods. But when I'm using V and I want to make sure it is working, then I also have to define the specific EMP over here. EMP as then the specific value. But I don't want to do that. Now, what I am basically going to do is that I'm going to create my own function. Now, right after EMP, put in a comma, and here I'm going to put in the secondary bracket. Inside of the secondary bracket, I'm going to define the scope. So here, I'm going to put in $scope, and right after it, I'm going to put in a comma. Okay, now there we go. We have our function working as V. And now I'm also going to be putting in the same thing. Now, if I basically just save up the file, and still if I go to the site and refresh it, it will still show me the same thing because we did not customize our variable, neither our instance. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you are creating your own function like this, you will not be able to use multiple of these variables. So what you're going to do is just remove these. Let's just remove all of these. Okay. And I'm also going to be removing these texts over here. There we go. Now, if I just save up this file, and if I go off to the site and refresh it, it will take a bit of time to put in the specific identity. So I'm just going to go back to Node. And here I'm going to define that specific identity over here. And you can also define in any different functions. Let's say maybe I'm going to put in Y. Okay. So Y, I'm just going to put this one over here too. There we go. And you're going to save up the file. Right after I save up this whole file, now you want to go back into the Explorer. And if you just open this up, now you can see that we have Alice. Now, if I just open up Node right beside it, and if I just change the name, let's say instead of Alice, I'm going to put in, let's say, Rue. Okay. Now, if I just save up this file, and if I just refresh it, now you can see we have Rue again. Now, let's try out putting in more. So if I just try to put in y.ty is going to be equal to, let's say, I'm going to put in, let's say, 200 again. Okay. I'm going to close this off. And here, I'm going to put in here is double third bracket, and I'm going to just put in ty. That's it. Okay. Now I'm just going to save up this file again. Save. Refresh it. There we go. Here is 200. Now you will also be able to put in more if you want to and however you prefer. Now, obviously, there are a couple of different ways of how you'll be able to put it. Another thing that you want to check is that if you want to, inspect it, when you just open up inspect, you'll basically see something like this. You can see we have the body, we have the head, and whatever codes we are using. But one of the most important thing you can see over here is that there are going to be a couple of signs which doesn't match up. Okay. But anything that we want to bind up the commands is going to display everything over here. Now, obviously, you will not be able to change anything over here. But if you just go back to Node and if you want to customize anything, it's also going to be shown inside over here. Okay. Now, obviously, you will be able to also connect it up to a couple of, let's say, return values. Now, if we first off go off to Node over here, now here, what I want to do is that I'm just going to go off the Node again. I'm just going to increase up the size. And first things first, what I want to do is I want to change all of these back into scope because I want it to be like that. Okay, I'm just going to put in scope over here. And I'm also going to define it $scope. Okay. I'm also going to be putting that over here, dollar scope. Now, what I want to do over here is that I want, let's say, a specific value and I want it to be multiplied. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in scope dot, let's say, annual val. Okay, so I'm going to put in annual val dot equal to, let's say I'm going to be using a specific function. So I'm just going to put in function. Inside of the function, I'm just going to put in open parentheses. Make sure to put that in. And right after that, you're just going to open up the third brackets. That's it. Now here you want to put in the return value. So here inside of the return value, I'm just going to put in, let's say, whatever you prefer. Let's say maybe I want to put in this, or let's say I'm just going to put in this dot ty, which you can see over here is the ty value. So when I put in this dot ty value, and obviously I want to multiply it, multiplied by 12. And here I'm just going to close it off. Okay. Now what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to put in your annual value is, open the third bracket, and obviously you want to put in the get, okay? Or let's say I'm just going to put in the specific annual value. I'm just going to put in, let's say, get Control C, make sure to copy it, and obviously paste it inside over here. Get annual value, okay? And obviously inside, you also have to define the specific function. Just put in this parentheses. But make sure that this specific value also matches up to this one. Okay? Now, if you want to just save up the file and go off to the site, and you basically have to refresh it. Just as you refresh it, you can still see that we are getting our exact value. Now, even if I open up Node, let's say I'm going to minimize it so that you can see that the function is working properly. So if I just put it on 20, and if I just save up the file, and if I just refresh it, you can see now this is 4,000. So this is basically how simple it is when you are trying to find out the connection between the scope and also like specific different values. Now, obviously you will be able to work with different Angular, let's say, controllers. So if you want to use like multiple Angular controllers, you can also do that. And it's also very simple to do so. So if you want to do that, you basically just have to create another line or another body. So what you basically have to do is that, let's say I got my annual sal value right over here. And we also closed off the div tag. Now, right after that, you're just going to put in another div tag. You're just going to open up div, close it off. And obviously, I'm just going to end this div tag over here /div. And inside, you are going to put in the specific value. First thing that you want to do is that inside of the div tag, you want to define the controller. So I'm going to put in ng controller. You can see we have defined the ng controller. And inside the ng controller, you also have to define what you are using. Let's say I'm going to be also using the same EMP. So if I just put in, let's say, equal controller, I'm just going to copy or keep this copied over here, equal to, let's say, EMP again. Okay, so I have defined it again as EMP. Now, inside of this, I can also define more lines. I saw identity. There we go. We have the variable. Right on the comma. Let's say I'm just going to put in the specific value. Let's say right on the 200th street. That's it. Now you just want to save up the file and you can just refresh it. There we go. Now we are working with the same variables and also the same controllers. But you will also be able to create more controllers inside of your script. Now, if you want to work up with multiple controllers inside of your script, you also have to change the name. First off, what you basically have to do is you have to go back into the controller again, and you can see in this app controller, we are defining it as EMP. But what if I want to create another one? So if I want to create another one, what you basically have to do is you have to create the app controller again. So let's say I'm going to create Control C. And right after this ends right over here, before the script, you're going to create another app controller. There we go. So this is how simple it is. There we go. We have another app controller. But what I want to do over here is that we are going to be using a different value. So here, I'm going to be putting in, let's say, thanks. That's just it. You can use whichever variable you want. Now, instead of this, I want to put in, let's say, Cassie. And instead of ty, I'm going to be using, let's say, 4. Okay? Now, it's still going to be the same, okay? Even if I save this file up, if I refresh the site, it's still going to be like this, okay? Because now we are using multiple of them. What you basically have to do over here, instead of EMP, you have to define these, like this exact controller that you are using. So what you basically have to do is that instead of EMP, just type in or put in thanks, okay? So here, I'm going to put in thanks. Okay. Another thing that you have to make sure to keep in mind is that make sure everything ends at the end. So here, what you're going to do is just Control X, paste it right over here. There we go. Now you can see we have the controller working properly. Save up the file. And now you're going to try to refresh up the site. If it doesn't work, then you have to check on the command lines again. So what I'm going to check is that we have the ending of these brackets over here. So one mistake that we did is that we also have to put in the same thing over here too, because now we have two controllers. Now, one thing that you have to check, and obviously it is like a con of using Atom, but I just like using this. So if you try Visual Studio Code, it's going to show you which one is closing off the tags. So let's say this one is this one over here, and the second bracket is this one, and also this is the third bracket. Now, if we basically just save up the file, go off to the Explorer, and if we just open this up, now you can see this is working properly. So even if we open up Node over here, and now if we just basically change up this, instead of this, we have thanks over here, instead of identity, I'm going to put in name. Now, if I refresh this, first off, I'm going to save this up, refresh this, you can see there is no specific value because it cannot find which variable I am using. So what I basically have to do is I have to change this name over here. There we go. Now, if I just save up the file, refresh the site, and there we go. We have I saw Cassie right on the 4th Street. So that is basically all you need to know about this class. Now, I'm going to be defining every command lines and how this is structured and how it functions in my next lesson. So make sure to practice this on and also try it on your own if this works perfectly. If you still have any confusion or any question about any part of this lesson, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next part, or let's say the part 2 of this class. Welcome to part 2 of scope and its relation with controller view in AngularJS. In part 1 of this class, I've shown you how you will be able to create or represent your data using scope and its relation with controllers. So in this class, or in this part of the class, I'm going to be defining every description and everything that you need to know about the command lines so that you have a better idea and how you'll be able to create your own functions and how they actually function inside of the module. So let's get into our class and let's open up the file which we used in part 1 of this class. So we have opened up the rlt.html file which we've used in the first part of this class. Now in this whole structure or firmware, what we basically have to understand are the command lines and how this actually functions properly. So what we are going to be learning about first is going to be, let's say, the scope. Okay, so basically the scope is, it basically helps you to create new controller instance along with scope. Now, where are we using the scopes? So there we go. We have the specific scope, and where are we like defining it? So if we go off to the ng controller, we have it as EMP. You can see this over here, and we are also defining it inside of our app. So what basically does is that we have the EMP identity as root, and we also have the EMP-TY as 200. Now you'll be able to change up the data values or any variable however you prefer. But one thing that you can see how we are basically defining it and also representing it inside of our web is right over here as the third bracket being used 2 times. So this basically controls or connects this EMP to this third bracket over here through data binding and also expression evaluation. And another thing which you can see, we are using this EMP over here. This basically creates new controller instances along with different scope. Now, in this scope, there is a boundary / context such as the memory area, or known as the memory area. It can contain data for data binding. And another thing that you have to keep in mind is that it sits at DOM attached to the specific element, which we are using as a specific variable. So scope gets merged into controller instance, and the controller has direct access to the specific scope, which we are using over here, and also here, and also over here, and here. Okay, so this basically controls and also holds up all of these data. Now, each and every one of these scopes or controller instance, such as EMP, are the one which we've used as thanks. It is connected to the module controller, which is the controller instance. So all of these are connected together one by one or step by step. Now, another thing that you have to keep in mind is the specific scope which we are defining, and the whole thing that is being inside of, let's say, this like data area is this div tag, and also, let's say, whatever variable we are using inside of this, let's say, representing value. So this is basically the scope, which is direct scope access inside of the controller, and this one is being connected directly to the function of the scope. So like, there are a couple of things like people make it very complex, but if you just go into more demo, you'll understand it more, such as working with scope object in controller, accessing scope in console for debugging, or maybe like, testing. And obviously you have to like practice the best practices for understanding each and every one of them. And obviously if you just go more into like inspect of the value inside of any application or any website, you will also understand it better. And another thing is that we mostly used just the scope. But if you want to use any specific instance, such as maybe any specific numerical or maybe any specific alphabets, which we've done in my second class of this whole course, where I've used I or Y or maybe V, you will also be able to put it inside over here. But when you're using directly scope, you just basically don't have to define it. But also, while using scope, you can also define it just by using any specific value, such as maybe O or V, or let's say P, whichever alphabet you prefer using. So hope you understood about everything in this class, and thank you for watching this video up till the very end. And if you still have any confusion or any question about any part of this lesson, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. Just make sure to practice it along and also try it on your own. And After doing so, if you if you are still facing any issue, feel free to tell me. And also I'm going to be attaching couple of the resource files and also each and every one of these HTML files so that you can check it out and also find out the problems which you are facing so that you get an easier solution. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of Angular JS. Welcome to another class of Angular JS. In my previous class, I've shown you about the relation between scope and also the controller or view. In this class, we're going to be learning about understanding scope inheritance in Angular JS. So let's get more into our class. In Angular JS, scope inheritance is a key concept that helps manage data in your application, especially in nested controllers and directives. Here's a breakdown of how it works. 1. Scope basics. Scope. It is an object that refers to the application model. It acts as a bridge between the controller and the view. So, a scope is very important between the controller and also the view. Scope. It is an object that contains the model data and also the functions to be used inside the view. Scope hierarchy. AngularJS creates a hierarchical structure for scopes. Each controller gets its own scope, which can inherit properties from its parent scope. When you create a new scope, an example in a child controller, it inherits from its parent scope. 3. Inheritance. Child scopes inherit properties from their parent scopes. If you set a property on the parent scope, the child can access it. If the child scope defines a property with the same name, it overrides the parent property for that scope, such as called shadowing. In my previous class, I've shown you that first off, we were using two of the same name as EMP, but we were still using the same variables in multiple deviation brackets. So that is what it is. So if you already have a parent scope applied, you will also be able to create a child scope so that you can make more variables and more controllers to the view. Number 4. Two-way data binding. Changes in a child scope can affect the parent scope due to the inheritance chain. This means that if a property is changed in the child scope, it can reflect back up on the parent. Number 5. Use cases. Controllers. When you have nested controllers, the child controller can access properties defined in the parent controller. Directives. In directives, you can create isolated scopes or let the directive inherit from its parent scope. Number 6. Examples. First off, we are going to define the controller such as app.controller, and then you are going to define it either parent CTRL or maybe it's even your own keyword such as I use EMP or I also used thanks. And then you are going to define the function with the scope. Inside of this function, you are going to define the specific text which you want to put up in the view or inside of the web. So such as here I got hello from parent, or I have used the specific variable scope.message. So when I use message or scope message inside of my div tag or inside the body of HTML, when I'm trying to view it or represent it inside of my web, I have to put that specific function, or let's say that specific keyword such as message as I have over here. Then when you are trying to create another app controller, then the child control, or let's say the child scope, starts working. Even if you use the function as scope, then you are also using the same variables hello from child. What happens is that it overrides the parent message. So in this case, you also have to make sure that both of them are different. In this case, if you access message in the child scope, it will return hello from child. However, if the child does not have a message property, it will access hello from parent. Number 7, best practices. Use ngIf or ngShow to conditionally display elements, as this can help manage scope more effectively. Avoid deeply nested scopes, as they can lead to complexity and performance issues. Prefer using controller as syntax to reduce confusion around scope inheritance. Understanding scope inheritance is crucial for managing data and behaviors effectively in AngularJS applications. It helps keep your components organized and maintains a clear data flow. So, now that you know everything that you need to know about this complexity and also a brief about, let's say, scopes, so let's get more into practical lessons so that you'll be able to apply it and also understand about parent scope and also child scope. From my screen, you can see that I have opened up Atom. Now, what I want to do first is I'm going to create another file. So I'm going to right click over here, new file. And here, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to name my file as, let's say, SCP, such as defining scope, and int, scope inheritance. And I'm going to put in .html. Okay, hit on enter, and there we go. We have scpint HTML. So first thing that I want to do over here, I'm going to copy everything, Control C, and I'm going to paste it right over here. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be having a lot of these. So first things that I want to do is I'm going to remove everything over here as my variable or also as the snippet. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the div tags from here because I want to start off from scratch again. Okay, there we go. I'm going to close off the tag and let's just remove this RLT. So as we have this scpint.html, now I'm going to start putting in more commands to it. So right after JavaScript, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting in more functions again. So if I want to put in more functions again, I have to start off with the var, or let's say variable. So var sample is equal, let's just take one from here, copy and paste it. Let's just close this off again. Var sample is going to be equal to Angular module. Angular.module. Okay, make sure to put that, open up the parentheses, and then you have to define the sample. So first off, put in double quotation, and I'm going to put in sample. Okay, so right after that, put in a comma, and obviously put in the secondary bracket to define your own function. Right after that, close off the parentheses and put in this colon. Okay, now here I'm going to be defining my controller, or let's say the sample controller. So I'm going to put in sample dot controller. Okay, so we have sample dot controller, and here you want to specify the specific keyword. So I'm going to be using emp again, or maybe I can also use thanks. I'm going to be using thanks in this case. So I'm going to put in comma and put in the secondary bracket to define the scope. So put in the $ scope. Okay. Now, right after the quotation, put in a comma and then define your function. There we go. We have the function, open the parentheses and define the scope again. There we go. You don't have to put in, let's say, you don't have to put in anything related to, let's say, double quotation. Right after the scope, you want to open up the third brackets and obviously put this over here. Okay. And here you are going to define the exact keyword to define what data you want to view. So here, first off, put in scope, scope.id. That is what you want to put in, or maybe even whatever you prefer. And it's going to equal to the specific keyword or the specific word that you want to make it visible. So let's say I'm going to put in marked. Okay. So right after that, put in this colon again. And basically you are almost done with this. And here, make sure to close this off again. Now here, right after script, we did not define anything else except for body ng app is equal to, let's say, sample. Now inside of the body, you also have to put in the div tag to define your data. So start off with the div, close it off. And here you want to define it with the ng controller. Ng controller. Okay? Ng controller is going to be equal to that specific value that you are using as thanks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in double quotation thanks. Okay? Now, after you are done, you have to put in what data you want to put. So let's say I'm going to be putting in this is the name of. Now, first off, you have to put in 2 third brackets and you're just going to put in ID. That is it, which is the same one as over here. Now, right after that, what you want to do is obviously close the div tag /div, close it off. Now, what I can do right now is basically the same thing that I did in my previous classes. So I'm just save up the file, show in Explorer. If I go off over here, go to test, scpint. If I open this up, you can see this is the name of Mark. Now, another thing that I can do over here is that what if I want to make sure this is bold? So I'm going to be using a tag of HTML. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go off the node or over here, and I'm going to put in the tag, let's say strong. Close it off. And I'm going to close off the tag over here /strong. And obviously make sure to put in this colon over here. And I'm going to do is going to be saving up the file, go up to the browser, refresh it, and now you can see that this is bold. So this is basically how you'll be able to understand it. But you can see that we are still working with the parent scope. Now, what if you want to create the child scope? If you want to create the child scope, you have to basically do the same thing which I did in my previous class. So first thing that you want to do is go off to any IDE which you have. So right after that, you're going to create a bit more space. And here I'm going to put in sample.controller. Okay, so sample controller, and here I'm going to put in, let's say, a couple of details. So here I'm going to put in, let's say, deets. Okay, so there we go. Now I'm going to be defining my deets. So this is basically, let's say, the child controller or the child scope, as this is the parent scope which we were working with in most of these classes. So even though you might think that both of these classes or both of these lessons are basically the same, but it's just for you to understand better. Now, what I'm going to be doing over here is I'm going to define my function. So to define my own function, put in the second bracket first, put in double quotation, $scope. There we go. We have the $scope applied, put in a comma, and then type in function. Okay, now after putting in the function, open up the parentheses, and then you have to put in $scope over here. Now after that, after let's say this one, I'm going to hit on enter so that I can start off on this one again. Now another thing that you will check over here is that we are not going to be having any third brackets yet. But obviously I would suggest you open up your third bracket right over here. Okay, I'm just going to open up the third bracket, hit on enter. Okay, that's what you're going to do. Now I'm going to be creating 2 specific variables. So I'm going to put in dot, or let's say $scope dot mon to define my money is going to be equal to 5,000. Let's say I'm just going to put in 5,000 and $scope dot tim. That's it for the time. So here I'm going to be putting in, let's say, sales, or let's say I'm just going to put in, let's say, USD. Okay, so what I'm going to do over here, I'm going to end it off with this. So we have both of them ending and also closing. So this is the parent controller, this is the child controller. Here I'm going to close it off, or let's say I'm going to, like, just create a bit of space. The next thing that I want to do is right after this div tag, I'm going to create more div tags. So I'm going to put in div, close it off, and I'm going to end it off again, /div. That's what you're going to do. Now, what you want to do over here is you have to put in, let's say, whatever details you want to put. Let's say in this case, we are using another like keyword such as deets. So you are going to be defining that over here. So type in ng app, or let's say you can put in ng controller if you want to, but I would suggest you use ng controller. There we go. ng controller is going to be equal to deets. Okay, the same one which we are using right over here. Okay, deets. So the next thing that you want to do is obviously you have to put in the specific data. So here I'm going to put in strong, and here you want to define it with the third brackets, and here I'm just going to put in, let's say, mon, and I'm going to close it off slash strong, close it off, 5,000, and I'm going to put in, let's say, USD. So here, I'm just going to open up the third bracket 2 more times again, and here I'm going to put in TIM. That's it. Or let's say I'm just going to put in CUR. Okay? Instead of TIM, I'm just going to put in CUR to define the specific currency. So that is what you basically have to do. So now if I just save up this file, I'm just going to save up this file, save it up. Now if I just go off to the website which I've opened up, you can see this is the name of Mart 5,000 USD. Now if I want to change or put any specific, let's say I want to just define this over here. If I save this up, go off to my site, refresh it up, you can see 5,000 USD. Or what if I want to change the details? So if I just go off over here, this is the salary of this specific person. So if I just save up the file, go off to my site, refresh it, this is the salary of Mart. Now, another thing that you want to check is that about the parent scope and the child scope. Now, if I put in ID over here, and if I just put in ID over here instead of money, and if I just save up the file, if I go up to my site and refresh it, it might show me an error or nothing over here, because now it is overriding this specific value, even though it doesn't meet up to its requirement. So if I just go off over here again, and I'm going to save up the file, go off to my Explorer, which you can see already opened up, open this up again, and you can still see it is overwriting it. Okay, so if I just go off to Node, and you can still see I'm using deets as the specific source, but I want ID. You can see ID is the same one as 5,000. So what if I just change this to deets, or if I just put this into deets? Save up the file, go off to the site, refresh it, and you can see now it is showing me up the error because we are using the parent scope. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that you will not be able to change the parent scope, but you will be able to override the child scope. So if I just go off to Atom again, and instead of deets, I'm just going to put in thanks. And we have the ID, which is 5,000 again. And you can see this is both the same. So if I just refresh it or save this up, go off to the site, refresh it, you can still see this is not working properly. So that means it is showing me a couple of errors. Now it is not able to override it. So what you basically have to do is you have to change up the values again. First thing that you want to do over here is that we have the thanks over here and also the deets. So first thing we have the ID and also the currency. Instead of ID, what I'm going to put in, I'm just going to put in cell. And here I'm also going to put in cell. Okay. There we go. We have app, and instead of thanks over here, I'm just going to put in sample. Okay. Save up the file, go off to the site, refresh it. There we go. It is back to normal. Now, if I just put this into deets, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this into ID, save up the file, go off to the site. It's either going to overwrite or it's either going to remove the value. So now you can see it is overriding the parent value too. So hope you understood about everything in this class. Now I'm going to be describing everything that you need to know about the inheritance. Now the first thing that you need to know about the inheritance are, let's say, the descriptions. First off, we have been using thanks as, let's say, the instance. Now this is basically connected to the module controller. So the module controller is basically thanks. Okay, so this is also the thanks detail. Now in the second one of view, which is basically the body or the div tag, when we are using emp, or let's say thanks or deets, whichever you prefer, it is basically using the data of the scope directly connected to the scope and also the module at the same time. So sometimes it could be very, let's say, connected, or let's say sometimes it could be very like complex about how you would understand about it. But another thing that you have to keep in mind, even if we are using child controller, it is still going into the data area of the scope. So make sure to keep those things in mind because it might override a couple of details and you might not be able to get specific values. So what you have to think about is when you are using any of these values, cell, cur, ID, or any specific variable that you are creating, everything is going inside of the scope data area. So including the name or the keyword which you are using as source, everything is interconnected to the scope. So whatever you define over here, you'll be able to use that specific module, and also you'll be able to view it inside of your web just by like customizing your own command lines. So thank you for watching this video up till the very end and hope you understood about everything in this class. If you still have any confusion or any question about any part of this lesson, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of Angular JS. Welcome to a new class of Angular JS. In my previous classes, I've shown you everything that you need to know about scope and also controllers and also how you're going to use Vue. In this class, we're going to also learn a very important class in learning Angular JS. In this class, we're going to cover everything that you need to know about data binding and three of its specific classification: one-way, two-way, and one-time Angular JS data binding. So let's get into more of it. One-way data binding. The definition of one-way data binding is that data flows in only one direction, from the module to the specific view, such as commanding or coding in any IDE and representing it inside of the web. Usage. Typically used for displaying data in the UI without allowing user interaction to modify it. So that means only the developers will be able to customize it and also they will be able to interact it. But the users will not be able to modify it, only they will be able to interact with the model applied by the developer. Example: if you update a module variable, the view reflects the change, but any changes in the view do not specifically affect the model. So only the DevOps, or let's say the developers, can only customize the UI and make it interactive. If the developers want it to be non-interactive, they can also design it in such of that way. Two-way data binding. The definition of two-way data binding is that data flows in both directions, allowing changes in the module to update the view and vice versa. Usage. Commonly used in form inputs, where user input directly modifies that specific model. Example: if a user types in an input field, the model is updated, and if the model changes, in example via an API call, the view is also updated automatically. So what happens in two-way data binding is that data flows in both of the direction, allowing changes in the data area and also the module to update the view and vice versa. One-time data binding. The definition of one-time data binding is the data is bound once when the view is rendered, meaning it does not update after the initial binding. Usage. Useful for performance optimization when the data is static or doesn't change after initial specific load. So that means when the data is applied, there is a certain limitation to it, or we can hold it like that. Example, you can use one-time binding in expressions like any specific expression defined in your controller of AngularJS while holding up two third brackets, which can display the data only once without further updates. But when you apply app controller or Angular module inside of your command line of your specific design, or let's say your firm, or even the structure of the web application, you'll be able to use it multiple times. But the expression can only be used once to define it and also take it inside of the module data area. These binding types help streamline data synchronization and enhance user interaction in AngularJS application. So, hope you understood about everything. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to open up any IDE and we're going to start on customizing and also putting in our AngularJS command lines. And let's customize or build up our structure of the web and also make sure that we can represent the data just by using those specific commands. And if you didn't check out, or let's say if you still have any confusion, or if you have any confusion and also questions or facing any problems with my previous classes, and if it is not effective and is not working properly on your UI, or let's say on your web, and you cannot represent it, then I would suggest you feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. Because if you still did not understand and if you still cannot input the same data and get the results like you need or just how I've shown you, then obviously you have to practice more on those parts and you have to check out my previous videos properly. And make sure not to skip any part of these classes, because if you do, you might miss out on something very important. So let's open up the IDE or Atom on our device. As you can see from my screen, I have created, or let's say I have opened up Atom, or you can use any IDE you want. Now, the first thing that we are going to be doing in this command line or in this class is that we are going to be creating two files so that we can use one as the root scope. Now, if you still don't know about root scope, it is the source of any JS files that we want to use. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is that I'm going to click on this test option over here, click on new file, and let's say I'm going to name this res.js. So this is going to be the resource folder, okay? Or let's say the resource file or the JavaScript file, which we are going to be combining. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to create another file, new file, and I'm going to name the file, let's say data B, okay? Data B.html. That's all you need to do. Now, what I'm going to be doing over here, I'm going to copy everything that I need over here, and I'm just going to like paste it. And if you want to start off from scratch, that is also doable. Now, the first thing that we are going to be doing over here is we are going to be removing every script. But what I'm going to do over here is that we are going to be taking these variables inside of our JavaScript file, and we are going to be using that as the root value, or let's say the root source. Okay. So first thing that I'm going to do over here is that we have the specific script, and inside of this specific script, I'm going to keep it up till here, and the rest of the things that we have over here, I'm just going to remove it because we are not going to be needing any of these. Okay. And the next thing that I want to do over here is that I'm also going to be removing these controllers because I'm not going to be needing any. So let's just remove those. Or let's say I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this one too. There we go. So as we have removed all of these files, now first off, we're going to start off as the resource file, or let's customize our resource file first. So we're going to start off with a specific variable as our JavaScript. So variable is going to be our specific app. Now, when we have that specific app, I'm just going to copy this equal, Control C, paste it over here. The app is going to be the module. So I'm going to name it Angular dot module. Okay, so as we already have the Angular module applied, but if it's still not working properly, first off, we have to use it as source. But let's just customize our module first. So we have the Angular module, open up the parentheses and define that specific app. So in that case, I'm just going to type in APPL. So that is going to be our specific application, which we are going to be using. Now, using that specific application or the name of the application with the keyword, we're going to be creating a function using the second bracket once. And then I'm going to put on this colon sign, and then I'm going to put in app.controller so that we can control the variable. Controller. There we go. We have the app.controller. And here I'm going to put in any specific instance. So in this case, I'm going to be using single parentheses, or let's say single quotation. Now I'm going to define in EMP. So after I have EMP, I'm going to put in a comma, and now I'm going to define my function again. Now in this case, I'm going to be using the scope function. So scope, and obviously make sure to put that inside of this quotation too. So $scope. Okay, which is going to make it more functional, and it's going to be more easier for us to put it inside of Vue. So after I have that, I'm going to put in a comma after that quotation, and after that, I'm going to put in function. Function, open up the parentheses, $scope. Okay, so after $scope, I'm going to be putting in the third bracket so that I can define my specific variables multiple times with different one of these variables. So starting off, I want to create the scope value again. Let's type in scope and then put in a dot. And let's say in this case, I'm going to start off with Z. So scope Z is going to be equal to a specific value 30, and put in this sign. I'm going to do the same thing over here to define another one of these variables. So I'm just going to type in or name it Y. And the numerical value that I'm going to be putting in is going to be 40. So basically, we are almost done on this part. And as we are only using one specific controller, we don't even have to put this sign over here. So we have basically created our resource file that we need. Now, even though we have created the resource file, but both of them are still not connected. So the first thing that you have to do when you go after the HTML file is that you have to make sure that both of them are connected perfectly so that it can take up the resource from this file. So what I'm going to do, or what you should be doing, is that we already have the first snippet, which is using the CDN of AngularJS from Google. So the next thing that you can see in the snippet or the script is just the type of, let's say, the type of text or the data which we want to input. So first thing that we want to do over here is that we have to put the source in this snippet. So type in src. Okay, src is going to be specifically equal, and then you want to define which file you want to connect to. So the source is going to be res.js. And obviously make sure that every one of these files is inside one of these folders, so it will be easier for Java or any of these IDE to identify and also find out the sourcing value. So when we have that specific sourcing value, you want to close off the parentheses, and you also want to close off the snippet. So as we have the snippet over here, I can also put the script over here because it will be easier for me to understand that the snippet has ended. Now, inside of the head, I'm going to create a bit more space so that it is a bit more easier for you to understand. Now, instead of the sample, we are not using any specific sample. Instead of the source, we are using APPL. So when we are using APPL over here, that means inside of database, we also have to define where we are, or let's say which specific, let's say variable or which specific keyword we are using as the Angular JS value. So now I have started off that specific resource from this JavaScript file. So as we have defined APPL over here, next thing that you want to do is that instead of the deets which we had in my previous class, I'm also going to check out my rest.js, and the next keyword that we are using is EMP. Now, even if you don't want to use EMP over here, let's just use PY just in case. So you can put in any of these like values or words, whichever one you prefer. So I'm going to put in PY just the same way I did over here. Another thing that I want to do over here, I'm going to save up this JavaScript file so that it will be more easier for this HTML file to identify and also read the database or read the data area of this resolution, or let's say resource.javascript file. Now, as we have defined our Angular controller and also we've started our Angular application, now we are going to be putting in those specific values inside of the view. So first thing that I want to view is that, let's say, the numerical value of, let's say, numerical value of Y, or maybe numerical value of Z, whichever one you prefer. Let's say just in this case, I'm going to be numerical value of, let's say, part 1 is, and put in third bracket to put in your expression. So for that, I'm just going to put in, let's say, Z. Okay, I'm just going to put in Z over here. And obviously, we want to put a break so that there is like 2 lines /BR. You don't even have to start off a starting tag for this. So you can put that off, and you can also close it off if you want to. Now, the next thing that I want to put in is the numerical value of part 2 is Y. There we go. And obviously you can put in a break if you want to, but I'm just going to put this just in case. You can like put it if you want to. You can also not put it if you want to. And what you want to do over here is you want to save up the file, open up the Explorer. Now you can see Explorer has been opened up. Now what I'm going to do over here is that we have the resolution, or let's say the resource file over here, and we have the database. So let's just open up this database. And you can see we are getting the exact value that we need to represent inside of our application, or to make it, let's say, interactive at the same time. Now, even if you try to inspect up the file, and if we just basically open up the elements, we can see the elements. You can see we have transition name, we have specific roots, just like I said, root scope being opened up. And if we just click on this, we have the ng controller in the body, all of these over here. And if we just open this up more, but you can still see that we cannot still see what is being used as that specific value. But one thing you can check over here all the time, or whenever you want, is that whatever data you put in over there, we'll be able to work with it. Okay, so you'll be able to change the value anytime you want. Let's say just in case, you'll be able to multiply it at the same time. But it also causes a bit of, let's say, a bit of complexion, or let's say it's just going to make the command line a bit more complex. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is that inside of our resource, I'm going to be defining a specific function. So let's just go off to Node, and we're going to go off over here. We already have the function applied. Now, what I want to do is that we want to span up the database. So first thing that you have to do is after is, now what you want to do first is that I have to put in the span tag. So if I just put in span, close off the tag, and inside of the span, you want to put in the ng data bind. So I'm just going to put in data bind, and after the class, I'm going to be defining or describing everything that you need to know about these values. Now, if we don't want to use these values, we will be able to like customize it the way we want to. Now, instead of this, let me just show it to you how you'll be able to, let's say, if you don't want to put any of these expressions, you'll be able to use span. So right after this div tag, I'm going to create another div tag. Close off the div tag, and I'm going to close slash div. Okay. Now here, I'm going to start putting in my data. So first off, I'm just going to put in the HR tag, so it will be easier for me to understand that there is going to be a horizontal row. Okay. It's just going to make sure to distinguish between them. So first thing that I want to do is I'm going to put in value of 1 is. Now, after is, you want to open up the tag. So I'm going to type in span, then ng bind. There we go. We have this ng bind, and then it's going to be equal to, let's say, z, which we are using as that specific variable. And then you want to close off the tag, such as slash span. Okay. Now we're just going to try it out if this actually works. So I'm just going to save up the file. Let's go off to our browser, refresh it, and you can see we are still not getting any specific values. But if you want to get out that specific value, we are also going to have to customize our command lines a bit more. Another thing that I want to do over here is that we want to create a breaking tag. Okay. So first I'm going to go off to node.js, or let's say atom, and I'm going to create a BR, or let's say a break. And I'm going to type in value of 2 is, now you're going to type in span, ng, then I'm going to type in bind is equal to y. Close off the tag, and then you want to close off this tag over here too. Okay, that's basically all you need to do, and I'm going to just close off and put another break over here. Now we're just going to check it out again if this specific value has been input. So now we have both of these lines, but we are still not getting any isolated values or any of these values which we want to represent over here. So let's just go back to Atom. Now, what I'm going to be doing to this, let's say, application is that I'm going to be creating the application to be a bit more interactive. But in this case, it might be a bit complex, but I'm going to guide you through the whole process. The first thing that you want to do is that we have the data AB. Now, what you want to do over here is I want to create a duplicate. Now, after AB, I want to put in 1 so that I can understand that this is the duplicate. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with the res.js. So I'm going to create the duplicate over here, res.js 1. There we go. We have 2 of these files now opened up. Now, as we have both of these files opened up, I'm just going to close off these first ones. Okay. So I'm just going to have this resolution or resource 1, and I'm going to have this data AB1. Okay. So first thing that I have to do is that I have to customize my resources a bit more. And I'm also going to be applying a lot of more functions applied to it. So the first thing that we want to start off with is going to be the scope values. So right after, or let's say after this, I want to create a bit more of these functions. So I'm going to type in $scope. So $scope, I'm going to put in do, let's say do twice. Okay. So that is going to be the, let's say, I'm just going to type in do twice and some and add. Okay. So that is what I want to name it. And I'm going to put in equal and then type in a very, let's say, specific function. So after that, open up the parentheses and open up the third bracket after that. There we go. Now, the next thing that you want to do is you want to add members inside of your scope, such as using child scopes. So here I'm going to put in $scope, let's say dot. And as we've used Z over here, I'm just going to put the same thing. I'm going to put in Z over here equal to, let's say, $scope again. $scope dot z, which we are using already, and $scope z is going to be multiplied into 2. Okay, close it off. I'm going to type that again for the second value. Scope dot y equal to $scope dot y into, let's say, 2. Okay, so as we have 2 over here, now the last thing that we want to do is we want to create a button so that it's going to, let's say, put the integer values and multiply it. So first that I'm going to do is $scope over here, $scope dot add. That is what I want to name it, equal to, let's say, I'm going to create my own function now. I'm going to put in parse integer value, parse int, open the parentheses, and I'm going to type in $scope over here, scope.z, and I'm going to add it up to, let's say, plus value. Okay, you can add in plus if you want to. You can also add in, a different value if you want to. Here, I'm going to be putting in plus. Now, after plus, I'm going to type in parse, and you can also put in the integer value, open up the parentheses, and then put in the secondary value, which is scope.y. Okay, so that's all you basically need to put, and then close it off. Okay, so after you close it off, you also want to close off this one because this is the secondary value. Now, as we have already customized our resource, now you want to go off to the database value. Now here, what we basically have to do is that we have already created a deviation tag for our ngbind. Now, what I want to do, as we are going to be creating or making this page a bit more interactive, is right after BR, I want to open up the HR tag. Okay, so HR tag is going to be equal to sum, is going to be, let's say I'm just going to copy one of these equals over here. Sum is going to be equal to, let's say, open the parentheses 2 times, and then you want to put in any specific value, let's say maybe the one which you've put over here, okay, which is add. So I'm going to name it add, okay? And you basically don't even have to put in double quotation because we have already defined it and we are using scope. So as we have put in our expression, now the next thing that we basically have to do is we have to put in the specific button. So for creating a button, you just have to put in the button tag, button, and what you want to do is you have to put in ng click, okay? Ng click is going to be equal, then put in this double quotation, and you want to define what command you've used to do this whole function together. Okay, so basically do twice and add. So I'm going to just paste it, do twice and add. Okay, so as we have that, and now we want to do is open up the parentheses, and that's basically all you need to do. Now the last thing that we want to do is we want to calculate, or let's say we want a button so that it can help us calculate these values. So after button, now I'm just going to put in calculate / and put in the closing button tag. Okay, that's basically all you need to do and close off the deviation tag. Now, if we just basically save up the file, and if we just go off to Explorer, let's just go off over here. Now let's open up database 1. Now you can see that we have these values over here. We have 1, 2, and we also have calculate. Now, if I just click on calculate, we still don't have any specific value that is being used over there. But what we want to do is that we want a summing value, right? So we can basically put in any specific value, which is going to sum up these datas. Okay, so these datas is going to work according to what data you input over there. So if we just change up the value, we'll be able to work with it according to our need. But there is also a couple of steps which you have to complete when you want to put on these data values. But the first thing that you want to do is go up over here And instead of res.js, I'm going to put in res1.js. Okay. Now you want to save up the file, go off to the site and refresh it. Now, even if you refresh it, you can still see that it is working just the way we want it to be. But when you go off to this database file, which is the first one, you can still see that we still do not have the calculate button. Okay, so we basically have to customize a bit on our site. Now, one thing that you want to do over here inside of the web is right click on anywhere, whichever browser you're using, just click on inspect. Now, when you go off to inspect, you will basically see on elements, it's going to call it div.ng binding. Now, we can open this up over here. We can find out which class you want to customize. We have span ng binding. And what you're going to do is enable full page accessibility tree. But one thing that you can see over here is that we are using the span one-way, two-way, or only one-time binding. Couple of cases or a couple of data will not be able to be changed. So if I just go off the console over here, we can put in a manual control over here. But even though this is only one way data binding, so even if I type in this angular dot element, I'm just gonna put this one over here, 100, or maybe even if I put in 200 for my Z value, if I hit on enter, it will show me 200, but it is still not showing me 200 over here. So one thing that you can try doing over here is you want to digest up the values because we are still on the console. So first thing that you basically have to do, you have to type in angular dot element. Make sure to put in the exact data, $0, close off the parentheses, dot scope, and after scope, open up the parentheses again, close off the parentheses, and put in dot dollar digest. Okay, and open and close off the parentheses again and hit on enter. Now, whenever you just put in this value, it will just put up the value inside of your secondary value, and now it is being digested. Now we can do the same thing for this over here, angular dot element. Now we have angular dot element, $0, close off the parentheses, dot scope, open and close off the parentheses, and you want to define in which value. So I'm using y as the secondary value. So y is going to be equal to, let's say, 100. Hit on enter. And we're still not getting up that value yet. So I'm just going to type in angular. I'm just going to put in digest over here. So I'm just going to put in this specific value. I'm going to hit on enter. So we have 200 and 100, and we can just press on calculate anytime we want to. And you'll be able to make sure that we have an interactive type of application already created. Okay. So thank you for watching this video up till the very end, and hope you understood about everything in this class. If you have still any confusion or any question about any part of this lesson, feel free to ask me anytime. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of AngularJS. But before ending the class, we are going to learn a bit more about the ng-click, or let's say the ng-app, ng-binding, and also two-way, one-way, and whatever description you need to know about this class. So there are a couple of things that you need to know about this class, okay? So we're going to cover up everything that you need to know. So first off, we're going to start off with the view and markup. So it is basically the one-way data binding, so you have to keep that in mind, that the view or the markup is directly connected to the controller scope. So it contains a lot of the data which you are going to be putting inside of these values, or let's say the view tab, or let's say your web application inside of the web. Okay, so what basically happens is that in one-way data binding, data flows from scope directly to the view. So the scope data gets propagated to view, and the data modification is propagated immediately and reflected in view. So the view data no propagation happens, and back to scope for any data change. So just like that, even if we manually apply these data, just like we did from the console, it is still not going to change anything inside of your command lines over here. You can still see Z, which we are using over here, is still 30, and Y is still over here as 40, even if we change it from the console inside of the web. Usually it is performed through ngbind, just like we did over here. Okay, so now we have only one-way data binding done to it. So basically, I hope that makes sense a bit more. So in two-way data binding, what happens is view markup and controller scope is directly connected, but both of them like exchange data in two ways. In one way, view and markup is directs the data directly into controller scope, but the controller scope does not send any data into view and markup. Okay, so data flows from scope to view and vice versa. The scope data gets propagated to view, and in data modification, propagated immediately and reflected in view. While in view data, it gets propagated to scope, while propagated directly and reflected in scope in data modification, usually performed through ng model. So you have to keep that thing in mind. While in one time, the data flows from scope to view, so the scope data gets propagated to view only once for the first time and cannot be done the next time. So in data modification, there is no propagation done. While in view data, no propagation happens back to scope for any data change, usually performed through, let's say, double quotation and then so on. So that is basically how you'll be able to, customize your application. And you can also make sure the application is interactive. And that is basically how you'll be able to create your own value. And you'll also be able to, create your own values just the way you want to. Another thing that you can do is you can apply this ng click for one-way data binding. And that is basically how I customized everything over here in res1, or let's say these values, which I did over here. So you can see we have the scope add, which we have added over here. So what I'm gonna do is that you can try putting in a different value, which is res1.js being used, and we are still using up this one, and we also have this res.js over here. Okay, so thank you again for watching this video, and let's move on to our next class of AngularJS. Welcome to a new class of AngularJS. In this class, we're going to cover everything that you need to know about the data binding ng-init, ng-bind, and ng-repeat. Before getting into our practical classes, or let's say our lessons, we are going to learn a bit more and the brief about each and every one of these data binding methods, or let's say commands. So let's get into our class. In AngularJS, ng-init and repeat are directives that help in data binding and displaying information in an Angular application. Here's a brief overview of each. 1. ng-init. The purpose of it is to initialize variables in the scope of controller, allowing you to set default values or perform calculations when the view is loaded. Usage. You can use ng-init directly in an HTML element. While it's convenient for quick initializations, it's generally not recommended for complex logic. Example: div ng-app equal to your specific application and then the ng controller inside of the div tag. And you are going to define your ng controller too according to what module you are using in the snippet. And you can also apply the ng-init counter with a specific value. Now, inside of your paragraph tag, you are going to put that specific counter, and you are also going to put the expression inside of it. Then, if you want to make your application a bit more interactive, you are going to be putting in a button inside of your web with the ng click, and then you are going to define the counter and you are going to put any specific word to view it inside of your web, and then close off the div tag and also the button. Now let's check out the advantage. Simplicity. Easy to set default values directly in the HTML. Intermediate setup. Quickly establishes initialized, or let's say initial state, without extra code in controllers. Local scope. Variables initialized with ng-init are only available in the current scope. Number 2. ng-bind. The purpose of it is to bind the content of an HTML element to an expression. This eliminates the need for using double curly braces, or let's say like this, in the markup, which can help with performance and avoid issues with HTML being rendered before the data is available. Usage. You can replace text content in any element with dynamic data. You can also see the example that I have put over there. And if you've seen my previous classes, then you already know about this deviation or these commands, or let's say functions inside of my ng app, or let's say my web structure. The advantage of ng-bind is starting off with the performance. It avoids the use of double curly braces for the expression, which reduces the reflow and also the repaint, saving a lot of time. Cleaner HTML. It makes HTML cleaner by eliminating interpolation in the markup. Automatic updates. Automatically updates the content when the underlying model changes, ensuring the view is always in sync. Number 3. ng repeat. The purpose of this is that this directive is used to iterate over a collection like an array or an object and a set of HTML elements for each item in the collection, or let's say the data area of the scope. Usage. It creates a new scope for each iteration, allowing you to refer to the current item using a specified variable. So in this case, you are using most of the time, let's say my app, or let's say whatever you prefer, like EMP for an instance. And also you are defining the ng controller with any specific, let's say, iteration. And what you want to do is that you want to start off with the listed order, putting on the ng repeat item in the elements, which is also going to be putting in, or let's say you also have to define the expression to view it inside of your web, and then you can close off the tags. The advantage of using ng repeat is the dynamic list generation. Easily creates lists and tables based on new scope for each item. Each iteration gets its own scope, allowing easy access to the current item. Built-in features. Supports various features like filtering, ordering, and tracking items with unique identifiers. These directives provide powerful tools for building dynamic and responsive AngularJS application, enhancing both development speed and user experience. The summary of them are given below. ng-init is for initializing variables in the scope. ng-bind is for binding expressions to HTML elements. And ng-repeat is for generating lists based on collections. So, hope you understood everything about this description and about each and every one of their briefs. Now, if you still have any confusion after the practical classes or the practical part of this class, then feel free to ask me anytime. But I would suggest you make sure not to skip any part, because if you do, you might miss out on something very important. So let's get into our class by opening up any IDE which you have on your device. As you can see from my screen, I have opened up Atom on my device. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my previous files and I'm going to create another JavaScript resource file. So I'm going to click on text again with my right click and I'm going to make a new file. So this one, I'm going to say jfp.js, or let's say resource 2, or let's say I'm just going to type in resource.js. Okay, that is what you're going to put, or whatever, iteration you prefer. Hit on enter, and there we go. We have the resource file. Now, we're going to be needing this resource file as the JavaScript, or let's say our source. So in this source, we are going to be creating the Angular module, and you are also going to create a variable over here. So I'm going to type in type in app, var app. Now you're going to put in equal, var app is going to be equal. I'm just going to put in equal again. And I'm going to type in Angular dot module. Okay, Angular module, open up the parentheses, and here I'm going to define my iteration. So let's say I'm going to say, or name it my appl. Okay, my application, comma, and then you're going to put in second brackets to close off the iteration. And there we go. We're done on this part. Now you're going to create more files, but all of them are going to be in HTML. So the first thing that we have to do is I'm going to create new files. Now, let's say I'm going to name it init, or let's say I'm just going to type in datac.html. That's what I want it to be. Or I'm just going to type in one datac.html. Okay, so it is more easier for us to find. Now, the first thing that we have to do is we need the doc type. So I'm going to put in HTML. There we go. So now basically we have all of the things that we need to use. Now, inside of this, we are going to be creating the title, and also we are going to be putting in the ng app. But here, most of the time, what we did is that we put all of the values inside over here, or let's say inside the head. But this time, I'm going to be putting in the ng app and also the snippet inside of the body. So I'm going to find out the body over here, and right after the body, I'm going to name it ng, and I'm going to put in ng app. Okay, so there we go. We have the ng app created. Now, after I have created that, I'm going to define my ng app. So I'm going to put in an equal. And after that equal, I'm going to put in my appl. That is what I've named it. Now, after that, I'm going to put in the ng init, which I'm going to be using. So ng init is also going to be equal to a specific value. So equal to, let's say I'm going to be starting off with z. Okay, z is going to be equal to, let's say, 5. That's it. And I'm also going to be putting in y is going to be equal to, let's say, I'm just gonna put 7 over here. Okay, so we have both of these values, and we are also going to close it off. Okay, make sure to close it off whenever you can. And I'm also going to put in this sign over here and close off the tag. So right after closing off the tag, now we are going to be putting in the snippet. So to put in the snippet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go off to download AngularJS. I'm going to go off over there, and I'm going to just copy up the snippet again. There we go. We have the CDN. It's going to go off to Atom again, and I'm going to type in script. There we go. Now script type is going to be equal to the specific variable, or let's say the CDN, which we have over here. So after that, we want to close off the tag too. Slash, and then I'm going to type in script. Okay, so there we go. We have the script ready. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to define the JavaScript. So I also have to type in script type is equal to, let's say, double quotation text slash JavaScript. Okay, so that is basically what you want to put in. And also you have to put in the specific source. So I'm going to type in src. Okay, that's what you want to put in. Another thing that you can try do is just copy this, Control C. I'm just going to paste it over here. And I'm going to type in src over here. I'm going to type in equal over here. Okay, so that is how I want it to be put. And after that, after putting in the JavaScript, and then I can also put in, let's say, the one or whichever file we are using. So the source which I'm using is one data. Let's say I'm just going to type that in over here, double quotation. It's going to type in this over here, one data c dot, or let's say resource, that resource.js. Okay, so after putting in the resource.js, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that up, slash, and then put in script. Okay, so there we go. We have this value, and now I want to paste the value inside of my web. So I'm going to put in a paragraph tag. I'm also going to be closing it off. There we go. And inside, I'm going to define, or let's say paste my value. So I'm going to put in the temperature today is, I'm going to put in the expression. Now inside the expression, I'm going to put in these values. So there we go. We have the Z. So I'm going to put in Z star Y. Okay, that's what I'm going to be putting in. And now we want to save the file. So let's first off save the file. And we're going to open this up in Explorer. There we go. Now I'm going to open this up. And there we go. We can still see that this is how it is showing me. Okay, so if this is how it is showing me, then I'm going to change a couple of values in the init. And I'm also going to, let's say, put a specific title. So you can try doing that if you want to. Now, inside of, let's say, the head, okay? So I'm going to be removing everything inside the head, and I'm just going to put in a specific title. Title, close off the tag, slash title. Okay? So there we go. We have the specific title, and I'm going to put in Angular JS. Okay? I'm going to save up the file, and there we go. We are almost done with it. So basically, if we just save up this file again, go off to the site, make sure to obviously save this up, go off to the file, and then you're going to try to open it up again from here. Let's just remove this. Okay, now let's just try to just open this up back from here. Okay, and if you just refresh it back again, and there we go, we have the specific answer. And if we just go back to our atom, you can still see that I just changed the value to A and B, and we are also using A and B over here. And we have the specific value 5 and 7 being multiplied onto our web. Now, even if you change the value, let's say I'm going to change this specific value to, let's say, maybe I'm going to put in 8, and this is going to be 2 over here. I'm just going to save up the file and make sure to just remove this. In a couple of cases, it just does not refresh up the file. So let's go off to Explorer again on here, and we're going to open this up back again. Let's just open up the file. And right after I open up the file, you can see the temperature is now 16. Even if we just open up the atom file, you can still see that we still have the same expression being worked over and over again. Now, as we have learned about the ngBind, now let's just keep on moving a bit more, or let's say we just learned about ngInit. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to create another paragraph tag over here, and we can start putting in the ngBind. So I'm going to put in the area, or let's say the space is Now I'm going to open up my tag again, and here I'm going to type in span. Okay, span ng bind. So I'm going to bind up the data. Ng bind is going to be equal to, let's say, I'm going to open up double quotation again, and I'm going to put in A star B. So it's also going to give me 16 as the value if the function is working properly. So I'm going to close off the tag, and obviously make sure to close off the double quotation. And we're going to close off the paragraph tag. But before that, let's just end the span tag. And then we're going to be putting in the paragraph tag, or let's say the closing paragraph tag. Okay. So let's just close this off over here. And there we go. Now, if we just save up this file, and obviously we have to go off the Explorer again. Let's just cut this off, go off the Explorer, and we're going to open this up from here. So let's just open this up. And there we go. We have the specific answer. It is given right over here. The temperature is 16. And even if we open up Atom, you can still see that we have the span or the ng bind opened up, are working properly. And also we have the ng init working properly. So what you basically have to do if you see that most of the errors are occurring and it's not giving you the exact result as you need, then obviously just try to just close off the tab, whichever tab or window you are working on the browser, to open up your own site, or let's say the structure of the web page which you are creating, and then it will give you out the answer a bit more better. Because whenever you refresh the site, what it does is it uses the same structure over and over again. But if you just close it off and restart the whole thing back on together, then it's going to read the data more better, and it's going to give you out the better result whenever you need it. Now we worked mostly on numbers. Now, what if you want to try to work with, let's say, specific keywords? You will also be able to do that very simply. First off, what you basically have to do is that we have the specific value A. Okay. Now, instead of A, you can also B. I'm going to put in O name. Okay. Now I'm going to put in any specific value. Now here I'm going to say Sam. And instead of this 2, I'm going to put in red. So there we go. We have Sam, and we also have red. Okay. So when we have these specific values, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change out this value over here. His name is, and I'm going to put in, like, curly braces or the third bracket 2 times. And inside this bracket, I'm going to put in, let's say, dname, which we have over there. We got this dname, and I'm going to add it up. Let's say I'm going to put in a plus over here, plus, and I'm going to put in double quotation here, space, plus, and then I'm going to put in O name. Okay, that's what I'm going to put there. And then I'm going to remove this expression because we're not going to be needing that anymore. And we're also going to be creating the span together. Okay, so I'm just going to put this same thing. Control C. And I'm just going to just put in, okay, let's just put in this one, Control C. And I'm going to paste this over here. His name is, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this off a bit more. There we go. We have the specific span value, and we're also going to be putting in ng bind over here. Ng bind is going to be equal to, let's just remove these because we're not going to be needing that. And first off, we have to put in dname. There we go. Dname. And I'm going to put in, let's say, plus over here, and then put in single quotation only 1 time. And I'm going to add it up back again with, let's say, the O name. Okay. Make sure that both of them are the same. So when we have these values, what we want to do is we are going to save the file. And let's just close this off for now because we're not going to be needing that right now. So let's just open up the Explorer. So from here, let's just open up this, and there we go. We have that specific value on our view and onto our web. So you can see how easy it is to work with ngbind and also nginit at the same time. Now you'll also be able to create like multiple, let's say, summation or various numerical values or mathematical terms just like this. But I would suggest you most of the time try just using alphabetical values or maybe specific keywords, because when you're using this, like, that specific snippet and the text type, or let's say the ng app to be the snippet of text, it just reads out and also analyzes the value of alphabetical or keywords a lot more better than numerical values. So hope you understood about everything in this class, and you can also see that I'm going to be adding each and every one of these files with my resource folder, so it will be easier for you to understand how I am using these command lines. So thank you for watching this video again, and if you still have any confusion or any question, then feel free to ask me. I'm always there to help you out. So without any further ado, let's move on to our next class of Angular JS.